understanding localization and its benefits to your games. Our moderator for this panel will be the lovely Kate Edwards, a geographer, culturalization consultant, founder and chair of the IGDA Localization SIG, and co-organizer of the Localization Summit at GDC. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. And so to my left, I'm left-handed too, is Janet Zabrichin, who is the, do you want to just introduce yourself real quick?
Oh, sure. President of company that I manage is called Localization, and we are an Apple preferred vendor. We have taken international, a number of gaming companies, starting many years ago with smoking car production, so to more recently Linden Labs, Zynga, where we did everything international from scratch, from international strategy, international product management to localization and development for international markets. We work with a large number of mobile and social gaming companies worldwide.
Hi, my name is Colin Williamson, and I currently work for a small indie team called 17-Bit here in Seattle. We're doing a game called Skulls of the Shogun. It's going to ship across all the Microsoft platforms in 10 different languages. And before that, I spent about 10 years working at Square Enix in Tokyo as their in-house editor for many, many Final Fantasy games. Too many, some might say.
Hi there, my name is Julian Chunovic. I am the senior producer at Z2 Live, a Seattle-based free-to-play studio that does social games on iOS. I basically head up their localization department, which is embedded within the actual studio. We currently localize into 6 languages, with English as the 7th. Prior to that, I worked as a localization producer and translator when I could on titles for Nintendo of America. And prior to that, I was sort of a freelance localization translator and did a bunch of things for a boutique translation firm based out of Tokyo called A4.
Hi, I'm Zeb Waddell. I'm a localization producer for Microsoft Studios. And previously, I was a producer for Microsoft Studios as well, working on Kinect launch titles. And before that, I was a game tester. All the way back in high school, I was a manager of a video game arcade, so pretty much my entire life has been video games. I'm very obsessed.
That's awesome. So, we've got a great amount of experience here across several companies. So, as this is a talk about localization, we're going to, and it's an intro track as well. So we don't want to be too intro, but we do want to kind of introduce more or less a little bit about our perception of what game localization is. So I'm going to ask each of you to kind of go down the line again and just give a really brief kind of, how would you define game localization? What is it to you? Besides the obvious, like translation.
Zeb, do you want to start this one?
Sure. Well, it's not really translation. Game localization is, the focus really is about making sure a game is culturally friendly. It makes sense as far as the target demographics, so you don't just focus on literal translation work. It's also about usability and making sure that your game is actually approachable and has no barrier to, small barrier to entry for other markets and other cultures and languages. And of course, the bottom part there is the actual translation work itself.
So Zeb's answer is pretty comprehensive. If I was just going to tag something onto that and touch on the idea of barriers, for me, localization for the most part is about taking a game that was crafted under one set of cultural norms and linguistic norms and removing all the barriers to gameplay that an international consumer might experience were they to take the product as is and try and play it. So basically to offer the exact same game experience that you're offering to consumer A in the native country to international markets.
I'll echo what he said. Plus, one thing I learned moving to a smaller indie team is that localization it involves a mastery of knowing everything that appears on your screen in a language. It's like you have to be incredibly anal about everything, down to the copyright, the copyright notice on the title screen. Where are things appearing? How are things centered? What fonts are you using? How are you rendering all this stuff? And a lot of people don't really think about this stuff, and they'll just throw English inside graphics and stuff like that, and you have to step back And you really need to define clearly how is my text appearing and how am I going to make 10 other languages appear on that part of the tutorial screen at that pixel, area. So I'd say discipline discipline and just mastery of your text is a huge part of it too.
I'm so glad you say that, Colin. It's really funny. Oftentimes, companies come to us and want to localize their game, and then we realize that the surrounding text is not at all interested in what they're trying to do. So we always urge them to look at payments channels and registration. Look at user communications, emails, forums, blogs, legal. For mobile games, obviously you have to do a really good description. You have to have your keywords selected, not on basis of direct translation from English, but a serious research into it has to go. But also, when I think of localization, it's really a lever for a company to increase their user base, to get more users, to play more often, to retain longer, and to make them more money. And that's definitely, I think several years ago when I started doing more mobile and social, it was really clear to me these gaming studios are much more focused on these metrics. They live and breathe metrics. I remember at Zynga we would get morning report and an evening report with metrics. It's that impactful, and it goes company-wide. So we're looking at localization in that context is really, really important. And I don't think enough people really do that. They think, okay, well, we'll cater to our users in these other countries. No, it's really, it can be a very significant lever to increase your monetization of them, right?
Right. So, just to give people a little bit of background, I mean, how many people in the room do you work in localization, or does anyone actually do localization? Just have a few. So
I do it all.
You do, well, yeah, you're involved with it, you practice it, you do, yeah, bad language here. Anyway, so just to give people a little bit of an idea, most people don't set out to become a game localizer, maybe more today than they used to. So like Zeb mentioned, for example, you were a producer, and now you do localization. So maybe just explain briefly, like, how did you get into game localization?
Okay, yeah, I mean, in most cases, people go from localization to production. They want to be a producer. I went the other direction. And I don't know if it's really a long-term thing for me, but initially when I moved into game localization, I was thinking, oh, this is a great opportunity to still work directly with the developers, still, be involved at that level, instead of working in like a publishing team, but work across multiple games. At Microsoft, I'm part of a shared service group, so I am split across multiple titles, so I ship 3-4 games a year. It totally ruins my life because I'm always in production and crunching, but at the same time, I get to ship a bunch of games. It's awesome. As a regular producer, I was always just, I'd spend 2 years on a game, and just one game, and that was everything. I had everything writing on it. So I wanted to work on more games, ship more games, experience more different disciplines and developers. That was sort of my idea of why I wanted to move to localization. There was a whole background to, I do play a lot of international games that weren't translated yet, games that took forever, sometimes a couple of years before they come to the US, so I'd buy them, I'd mod my system, get the game, play it, try to figure it out, trial and error. So I have a love for making sure games are translated quickly, localized so I can play them in English. So I got into localization, and then I realized about a year in, there's a lot more to it. And what I like about it is, as a loc producer, I work in the discipline of working with vendors, multiple groups and partners, cross groups all over the place. Just lots of more. It's a broad technical aspect to it. The business model itself is a hybrid of production and vendor management. And I think that's something that's going to be, for a producer, that is trending that direction. And a lot of game studios are going to be focused on having more of a vendor relationship and doing external partners to help, content creation and all those types of things. So being able to, gain that experience working through that at a pretty extreme level with localization, I feel that it's just good overall broad experience for me.
I guess for me, it probably starts sort of a similar place as Zeb's answer did, in the sense that when I was younger, I was also infatuated with video games and always tried to find a way to get import games to play, something I was looking forward to sooner. Particularly, growing up, the 90s was a very strong period for Japanese video games. I couldn't wait to get new titles, so eventually I got impatient, started importing and started learning Japanese, and ended up through the course of college and post-college realizing that I really enjoyed the idea of recasting content in a second language, because when you translate, you're wholly responsible for the international users understanding and I guess the flavor that they get out of that content. So I started translating, and that led me to start localizing video games, and then working at Nintendo, I got to touch a lot of really large titles, and I realized that the perception I had of these games growing up were ones that had been shaped and molded by some other human being other than the creators, and understanding that that was a really important part of the process got me really fascinated with the overall experience of doing that, and then doing that on a larger scale for a team of multiple languages. So sort of discussing with those teams, what is the core content that is important to this game and unchangeable, and what parts of the game, what parts of the presentation are malleable, and how should we be leveraging those for each of our communities, was something that really got me hooked on I guess, translation as a process, as opposed to being a translator. And so moving into the mobile space and being able to get instant feedback from users about what they like, what they didn't like, what they responded to, and understanding that there is no excellent one-to-one translation or one-to-one localization that fits all languages has been really gratifying. So that's sort of how I got where I am.
Yeah, like Julian, I was really obsessed with importing Japanese games, and it got to the point where I was so tired of waiting for them, I just moved to Japan. Yeah, I went to school in Japan, and I jumped into a small company as an artist and a designer, and then Square had seen that I had done. Somehow Square had tracked me down, so it's still kind of creepy. I'd been writing for some PC game magazines and been doing reviews, previews, etc. And they just called me one day and they're like, "Hey, you're an editor, right?" I'm like, "I think so." And they're like, "Why don't you come in and talk to us?" And what I did was not so much a translation as it was I was basically a script doctor. We would have, my first title was Final Fantasy XI, which was like 3 times the length of the Bible, and it's coming from all these different translators. So what I had to do is I had to basically dive in and just, like tweak, rewrite, unify, and really find the voice of the game, and like work with the other translators, to define, like find the game's voice and make something that was coherent. Because for games with just like that insane bulk of text, you need to have someone at the reins trying to, make sure that everybody's going to be talking, the same way, and all your item names are going to be referred to, the same way across, those 3 Bibles worth of text. So for me, it was a lot of script tweaking and dealing with bulk, a lot of bulk. Japanese RPGs are long.
I got into it a little differently. I always knew I wanted to work with languages. I knew I love translating already. I studied 7 languages, and all my entire career, I've done nothing but something to do with language and intercultural exchanges. Already in high school, I was translating short essays. In college, I put myself through college, doing translations from everything from short stories to user manuals for vacuum cleaners and toilet plungers, I think. So then after college, I got a job. I was super happy. I was working as a translator. We didn't call it localization back in the early 90s yet. So I was doing technical translation of software. I was obviously in heaven doing that, and then I also started my own company because working 8 hours a day is not enough. So I started moonlighting and doing translations for a number of companies doing business in the Middle East and the Balkans. Then a war in the Balkans happened, so I had to immigrate to the States, and I was super happy to get my first job in America for working for Inlingo as a translator. It was either that or fast food, so translation was better. And then in grad school again I was doing a lot of translations, but at that time also I discovered and as I said I have degrees in translation as well, but at that time I discovered gaming, and there was Jordan McNair, who just came from releasing Prince of Persia, a couple of versions of Prince of Persia, was starting his own company called Smoking Car Productions, and he was doing this game called Express. And I fell in love with the game, and I think I had a big crush on Jordan as well. But anyway, so it was really cool because I got involved as kind of a script doctor on it. It was a multilingual game in 8 languages, and I don't mean translated in any languages. There were 8 languages simultaneously in that version. So I got to also be a voiceover of a villain fighting a voice on top of a train and winning. It was really cool. So I was sold. I knew that was exactly what I wanted to do, game localization.
Very cool. Well, we know that, well, I say we know, we in localization kind of perceive the ongoing battle between us and them being developers. And so if you're a developer, no offense, but the QA people would say the exact same thing, is that no one listens to us, no one cares what we do. With localization, we often get that because localization is often pushed to the very end of the product cycle or very close to it. It's getting a little bit better, but so there's kind of this anxiety and, well, I should say animosity. But I don't know. Anyway, so let's pretend, for example, we rounded up developers against their will and locked them in the room. So what would be like the number 1 or number 1 and 2 things that you would want to communicate to them about what's important that they should know about localization? And anyone, feel free to jump in.
I would say one thing that it's sort of a blanket statement in some ways, but I think especially if you're dealing with a vendor, a lot of people have this sort of perception as, there's so much going on with development that, well, if you've got the package that you need to throw to your localization vendor, you chuck it over the wall, and sooner or later text comes back over the wall, and then you implement, and that's good. Maybe there's a QA pass for fit or something. But you're going to have much, much better results if you make the process of localizing your game and working with your localization team, be they in or out of house, an interactive one. That means furnishing them with as much material as possible to understand game context. It means having clear schedules from the very start about things and not compromising on those schedules just because other elements of development have condensed the schedule under which you want to do localization. There needs to be an active dialogue between the localization team and the developer, because both parties will benefit from that relationship. You'll get higher quality text, and maybe even you'll find things that you can do for your game that are low effort but yield great results in international markets. And if there isn't that dialogue, that conversation just won't happen. People will dig into the text, they'll throw you back over what they have, and that'll be the end of it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Julian. As a vendor, I'm the one that catches these texts that come across the wall. It's not always pleasant. And I think we definitely get best results when we really partner with our clients. So, the example being Apple, where it's a conversation. So we have a lot of feedback, and it really works great when we can talk to the folks in Apple, that do Apple.com or iTunes, and same situation with Zynga, where we're embedded, and DNA, NG Locus, Tornado. Those are very conversational relationships we have with our clients. Very much a partnership, much better so than if you just get that XML file. We don't even full of concatenated strings, and we don't even know what it says. But I think one thing that I would love to tell developers is just not to be afraid of localization. Because you do really often see that people are just petrified. You'll see sentences like, you know what, I'll release this in English and then we'll deal with languages later. Well, of course, if you can write your code clean enough, it'll just work for localization. And SimShip is a great way to get your a global launch out there, to update your game globally, and to really have really have an impact, as opposed to launching English now and then languages, I don't know, in a few months. Not least because you will have to rework the entire code in order to do localization. So yeah, if I was to say anything, it's just jump in early and don't be afraid.
So I have a different perspective in the sense that as a producer, it's about my return on investment. If I want a localization person to come in early in pre-production as a consultant. That's it. I don't want them to invest any resources early on. Things change too much. As a localization producer, I want to be in as soon as possible as well, and I understand that the developer doesn't want to start reacting to changes that features that might not even be implemented in the game. So keep a little bit of a distance, but get in early on, provide feedback to their font system, their UI layouts, their design direction, but fairly hands-off. As we get into production, that's when we really start to push, and we need to make sure that the game, we have a good plan that's in place, and that a localization team, so that would be our vendors, have a good business model that's flexible. Localization is just like any other content creation team. So if you use Sound Deluxe in LA for your audio production, or you use Liquid in Oregon to do all your art assets, those companies have a business model that's very dynamic and flexible. They throw bodies at situations. It does return back as a cost increase if you're randomly changed up at the last minute. Localization has to have the same flexibility. Usually I find myself as a loc producer pushing that, trying to be as proactive as possible because of the cost consideration. So I'm always like, look, let's make this decision earlier on. Let's try some ideas. Let's prototype some things. And I get myself caught up in this weird balance of spending money and resources early on, when in fact I should be making sure my team that I'm working with, be it a vendor or an internal resource, spending all that money and I need to make sure that they're flexible. So I look at it in two ways. It's about how much money are we going to be spending toward the end of the project versus how much are we going to spend early on being proactive when things can change quite a bit.
And it's a good, actually we fully agree that, getting involved early doesn't necessarily mean starting, translations or, spending money early. It just really means keeping track of, where the game is going and making sure it's not completely US centric. So something that's going to be really difficult to
That's right. You definitely, there's value in having your local consultant or whatever you want to call them, their producer, having them there early on as a sounding board or just someone that's in the meetings and those discussions. And when you're deciding on a whole, licensing some rendering technology or something, you definitely want that localization person in there to let you know, hey, I've dealt with this before, it's a nightmare. It's extremely difficult to develop around for local. Or they say it's fantastic, we've done it many times, it's a good decision. So early on you're making informed decisions that impact localization. And that's as far as we need to take it. Then once we get into production, that we can really get into the meat.
Cool. So for those who may not know, what would you say? Here's a two-part question. So what are the major loc markets today? I mean, what languages are you translating into? What are the kind of the key areas? A lot of us have heard the term FIGs. Does anyone not know FIGs? French, Italian, German, Spanish. So usually you'll hear local people say figs and J for Japanese. So like besides figs and J or figs J, what are the other places that you see? And on top of that, what do you see as being emerging? Like what are we looking at in the next 3 to 5 years or sooner even, the markets that are really coming up?
South American market I know is getting big. So you definitely want to do a localization in Brazilian Portuguese.
Well, in mobile, we definitely see, so the non-emerging, the ones that have emerged away. In mobile, we definitely see, Germany, France, Japan, China, Korea being really, good lucrative markets, and with the right localization. In social, we see Spanish being definitely the largest, and that's where Latin as well as Castilian come in. German, French, but also in social and online we see Norwegian, Brazilian, Portuguese, Italian, Turkish being very, very, very prominent markets. As far as emerging markets, I think it's been really interesting for me to see, especially on the Facebook games, because Facebook is so ubiquitous everywhere. So this is where you really see who likes gaming and who's coming on board and in numbers and retention and monetization, and you see countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand are really being impactful in gameplay, playing high levels and being really engaged. So there's in Latin America, like you were saying, and then going Eastern Europe as well. But yeah, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand have been really interesting and lucrative markets for a lot of our clients.
Yeah, I would augment that statement by also saying that people ask, what are the emerging markets? Where should I be going? And for me, it's much more questionable. What's your game? What's your financial model for your game? One thing I think is that I would never have imagined considering Russia as a market for a packaged product 6 years ago. But if you're talking about a freemium game that goes through your PC, well, it's a very different dynamic that you're dealing with there. And there are a lot of markets like that are coming out. Turkey, Arabic language has become more prominent recently. I do think that there are opportunities there, but when choosing where you want to go, you should think about how you plan to make money, because some things work great everywhere. Some monetization schemes will only work in certain regions, but will be far more impactful in certain regions. So I would just keep that in mind. But in terms of the countries listed so far, yeah, all of those have been good.
And always keep your platform in mind. For example, we're doing our game on Xbox and Arcade, and if we were just doing it on XBLA, we probably would have just done ePhase J. But because we're shipping, shipping with Windows 8, we're going to be like one of the first, and hopefully one of the first games in the App Store. And we wanted to make sure our game was going to be available in Russian, Korean, and I think we did 10 languages. So we just want to make sure that everybody who wants to play it can get a game in their native language.
Yeah, there was a lot of expanding regions mentioned in this conversation. I think that all those are absolutely valid. Definitely what everyone's touched on is it's about your game, your demographic, your business model. Every single one of those will determine if that market you're going into, even if it's an established market from figs, might not be worth going into, or maybe it is definitely worth getting involved in. I think one of the keys to the tricks to looking at what is an emerging market would be to see, is that country or region, are they getting more technical savvy? Is there an infrastructure being built for online experience on a everyday home? Are they getting involved in technology on the phone market or in the PC market? Those are the key indicators. Also, is the government serious about piracy? Right? The reason why Brazil is becoming such a prominent market for games is not because it's just suddenly magically happening. It's because that country is taking it seriously when it comes to dealing with piracy. So now it's no more viable for us to go into those markets. And that's the same story all over the world. Russia's a great example. Another one that's been difficult with piracy, and they've been changing that story.
Yeah, story. Russia has changed quite a bit. But when I was working at Square, I remember someone had given me a Russian copy of Final Fantasy IX. We didn't ship the game in Russia. There is no Russian version, but some hackers apparently had put together apparently it's a beautifully translated version of the game. They had hacked it and made their own version. The only story I have that beats that is I've heard rumors that Russians did a complete localization of Spyro the Dragon, complete with voice. So those guys get my respect. Wow.
Talk about fanboys or fangirls. So since we were talking about, I know a couple of you mentioned about the return on investment for a specific language, and speaking specifically about Russian, I know at the Loc Summit at GDC, 3 or 4 years ago, we had Jaime Guinea, who's the VP of Globalization at EA, gave a great example of where they took one of the old titles from EA, I don't remember what it was, some kind of racing game, and they spent a modest amount of money on localization for Russian, and they had like a 400% return on their investment. So does anyone else have examples like that? Or I'm just curious, that shows that localization does increase revenue. I mean, can you expand it beyond what the normal expectation?
I definitely see. I see that. I mean, that's I in fact even define localization in those terms. You definitely see localization really adding a lot of value. On social, for me, it was really interesting to watch to watch really how that platform really likes localization. Launching, for example, Cityville, we had close to 90% of the user base international, and this is a huge game. This is, we're talking 20 million DAU, daily active users. And then looking at how RPGs or gambling games, two genres that definitely are higher monetizable than asset management, like Cityville. Also, while they have smaller numbers of users, you're starting to get a really high percentage, over 50% of your monetization come from international markets. So, it was really staggering for me to, when we started first launching these social games, to see just how huge that return on investment was. And also, what it also did, other than monetization, retention, which is something you usually expect from a localization, is people who had never, so people on Facebook who had never ever played a single game because they just don't speak English, all of a sudden jumped in. So these were these staggering numbers of people completely new to network that were starting to play a game. And I think Zynga had millions and millions of people new to network coming in and starting to try other games. And I remember us doing some cross promotions where we would have where these people that are new to network in millions would jump into a new game. So yeah, definitely. And there's I'm sure there's examples ad nauseum like that.
I think, just to elaborate on the return on investment side of it, your game doesn't have to be localized all the way to the end. It doesn't have to be all your voiceovers are localized in that language, whatever language you want to expand to. It can just be the UI text. It can be just the manual, and that might be enough. It just depends on the game. And so it can be very low cost to localize your games whatever level you need to release to that country. Also, it's when you localize it, which is important. If you localize during development, you have all the resources already on the game ramped up, going full bore. If you localize after you've released, so you've broken SimShip, now you have to retain some level of engineering support to address the localization issues, which you surely are going to run into on the game. And then, that can be a drain and a significant cost on your team. So you have to always weigh those considerations if you want to get your team hot and heavy involved in trying to get the English release of this game out, but then throw a couple languages in there, you're going to get the most for your money. SimShip is always a very viable approach to releasing in markets you're going to do well in. It's a global community now, so a game that's released in the US and has all this marketing money behind it pushing out, that bleeds over to all kinds of countries and regions, because those blogs are pulling those articles and they're doing their own little translation of what's exciting about this game and features of this game. And then a person's really getting into it and they're like, yeah, this is great. Oh, wait, it's not even coming out in this country, right? So you can capitalize when you SimShip because you're getting that free marketing impact that's bleeding over into other regions when you SimShip.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, particularly if you're still doing a package release, there are a lot of places, for example, Russia definitely comes to mind, where having the game available day one is completely different than having a localized version in the works 5 months after the original product ships in English. It's not just obviously the Russian community that has this preference, but there are a lot of nations throughout the world where the preference is that the game is available for me when it's available for the first set of people that it was intended for. I might actually put money down on it, but if you make me wait any longer than that, I'm going to go out there and crack a copy because I want it today. Why should I have to wait? I don't even know when my localized version is coming. So particularly with packaged product, that's something that I've seen happen in the past.
Yeah, and don't feel like you actually do have to localize everything inside your game, because a lot of the flavor, some people, if you're making like an action game that's like an American action movie, it might seem strange for French people to hear the main character speaking French. There is one of the really nice things that was done in the original BioShock, for example. If you look around, there's posters, there's art, and there's text everywhere. It's like all over the place, and without actually translating all the text in all those posters, they had a system called art subtitles. You could switch on. I think it was on by default. And when you would mouse over, or you would move the targeting reticle over one of the posters, the translation would pop up underneath it, just in text, like they didn't localize all the art. But that was just incredibly clever, and I don't think anyone else does that.
Well, that's a fantastic idea, because one of the things that we were talking a little bit about not always being one-to-one, right? You want to kind of add a little bit of, you want to change the game a little bit to make sense in the culture here. You might be telling a ghost story in your game, and it's just completely makes no sense at all in another country. You could change some of that story to relate to a ghost story there, optionally. But what we was mentioning there is that you want to retain the style of your game, and a lot of designers are like, I want everyone to experience this game like it is experienced in America. I don't want it translated. I don't want the experience changed at all. And there are users in the world that really want that purist approach. They want the game. Personally, I'm that way. I like a game. I don't like a game localized in English from Japanese or any other language, and they change the story to make sense in the U.S. I don't want that. I want it to not make sense. I want to go research that and figure out why it's weird and try to understand it. That's just me, but I mean that's an option. So showing that style and then still localizing it as an option that's not like intrusive is a great idea.
Yeah, so there's obviously a very wide range of the depth of localization. I mean, at the Loc Summit this year, William Barnes of Blizzard gave an incredible talk about the depths that Blizzard went to localize StarCraft 2. And it was just this incredibly obsessive, compulsive, I mean, every sign and thing like Colin was mentioning, they localized everything. The artwork, the bitmaps, everything they localized across all the launch languages, which is one of the reasons it took so long for StarCraft 2 to show up. So it's kind of amazing. But yeah, I mean, kind of the box and docs approach, where it's just basically the packaging and the manual, and you're done. So even across that spectrum, we talked a little bit about what the advice would be, or like the one or two things that's important for developers to know. What would you say are some of the common pitfalls, though? What are the kinds of things you see, that come up a lot, and in the development cycle that are localization, just stuff people don't get or they do wrong, and how would you fix it? I mean, what should be done to remedy that?
There's a lot of last-minute changes that people forget to update. So we'll be talking about new text, change text. A lot of people forget about certain voiceover arcs. For example, let's say in one game there's a boss fight, and a character says, "You've got to hit his tail," and that's only done through voice, and it's never subtitled. And well, what if that game is shipping in France and you didn't bother to, and you didn't actually record a French version? Well, then you never, unless the person speaks English, they're not going to know to hit the tail. And I think we've had that pop up once or twice back when I was at Square, where there was kind of like these phantom mystery voice-over lines that just never got translated. So, like I said, discipline, know where all your text and all your voice is.
I would definitely sort of pitch onto that statement in that going one level larger than that, from the beginning that you begin, or from the moment that you begin the localization process, the actual, you're taking the text and you're doing something with it, you have voice assets, images, etc. Everyone who's monitoring the health of that project should understand the entire localization pipeline. I mean, what are you doing when you're importing text into a tool where you're doing your editing? How is that being exported? If you can't walk yourself through that entire process from the very beginning, I guarantee you somewhere towards the end of the entire process, when you're really trying to put all those pieces together, something's going to happen. Maybe you didn't think about how Serverlink would show up, or maybe there's certain special characters that only need to happen in a certain area, or maybe you're doing something like handwriting recognition and you haven't run sufficient test cases on it, and you realize that in 3 languages your handwriting or voice recognition technology just isn't up to snuff. It's not going to work the way it's supposed to. And so all of that stuff needs to be considered from the beginning so that you have a clear understanding of what is the content pipeline for localization as opposed to what is the content pipeline for the base language.
I have a few things. Memory footprint comes up a lot, both in your actual RAM that you're using in game during runtime, Usually East Asia glyphs take up a lot of space, and there's always concern there, so addressing those early on is key. A lot of the time, the localization teams would prefer that you load the entire glyph sets of those languages, being Chinese, traditional Chinese, Japanese, Korean. But usually we run into a lot of memory issues, and we go selective glyphs, which is basically we only pull the glyph sets that we use in the game, and then everything else gets stripped away and it reduces the memory. Hopefully in the future that is less of an issue, but now we're dealing with mobile and all kinds of other smaller devices, and we'll be back at that again. Also, the footprint would be as far as the your disk space or your available space for a digital game. When you add VO 15 languages, you blow up your footprint there. So be considerate about your impact there. Another really big one is asset tracking. So if you have a VO script that you're making lots of changes in and making updates and everything, that's fantastic, and that helps local a lot. But what's key is maintaining that even after you've checked in your VO into your game. There might be lines you might cut. There might be files you have to rename because of structure, different issues there that come up. Make sure that you track that stuff all the way to the end, and you reconcile your script from the recorded to what you actually in recording had done versus what's in the script, and then once you put it in the game, go back and make sure it's reconciled that direction as well, and then you give it to load, or you update localization. And the final thing is age ratings. If you're releasing on consoles, or if you want to honor the age rating systems across the world, it's a huge challenge. There are 11 age rating boards that I know of that all have unique challenges. Some require you to submit a full build that's stable and content complete, that they will actually play through all the way. Others, they just want some screenshots and some videos, or they just want the ESRB rating. A lot of them ask for money, and some of them have massive lead times. What comes to mind is Brazil. Brazil has a 40-day, those are working days, lead time. Unfortunately, they're on strike right now, so that's even worse. So, you face a lot of these unknowns that come up. If some countries like, I believe Australia requires you to submit in region, so you can't be some guy in the US that submits your game to this age rating board in Australia. They prefer to have it done with an actual subsidiary or somebody from Australia. So there's just a lot of dependencies in those external, government-run agencies that you have to account for if you want to release to all these different markets. And by the way, those regions require it even if you're just releasing an English version of the game in their country, not just localized.
Yeah, all that and more. We often joke that when localizers get together, it's like a support group because we bring up all these things that bother us. But yeah, hard-coded strings, suboptimal internationalization framework, not enough quality control, for localized languages. Lack of process, all these things come to play. The systems, to this day, we still get, strings in a spreadsheet to translate. Whereas, we have localization tools that are so sophisticated, we can just integrate into your build system and, pull strings out, put strings back, have tasks. We've done, release processes that last 24 hours where we, pull, translate, edit, pre-submission test, build, QA, fix bugs, submit, all in 24 hours. So it's really fun for us when we get spreadsheets or another day we got some strings pasted into an email. That was a winner. But it's we actually like when we see such challenges because we can help people organize this better. But as far as other problems that we've seen in the past, we've had to help our client where they thought that they would keep the same title for every country that they were launching in, and they didn't realize that the title had copyright issues into European countries. So we actually had to hold a release and go through a legal process to make sure that they can actually do that release. So there's a lot of different things that one could be thinking about. You can also go very lean and avoid a lot of pitfalls, but there are things to think about.
Yeah, one thing that is kind of bugs a lot of people is a font, especially with the Asian markets. Please just have someone local take a look at the font and just make sure that the font's okay, make sure that the kerning and the spacing is okay. For the longest time, so many American games that got released in Japan were using like this super gnarly looking Japanese font, and it was like the Microsoft Office font. I mean, it was, and when people picked up the game, it just had this air of cheapness to it. And like for Americans, it was like, oh, well, it's a Japanese font, whatever. But for Japanese, it was like, oh, it's like MS Word.
It's a system font,
Yeah, it was like a system font.
I'm like, okay, let's just go with system fonts because system fonts are much lighter to look.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up so we can do a little bit of Q&A here. So I want to ask you, do you have a favorite game that you worked on? Is there like one title that you look back on fondly and say, gosh, I wish I could do that one again? Or if you don't, is there one that you absolutely abhor? You never want to even hear the name of the game again. So it's your choice, whichever one you want to pick.
Okay. I can start. My favorite was working on Second Life. I know it's not exactly a game; it's a virtual world. But what was so gratifying about it was, and I remember I was saying, we look at every game that we localize and we say, okay, this should be the approach you should take that's, least trouble and most return on the investment. And this is the game that we saw there was a ton of international users inside Second Life, and obviously it wasn't localized. But these users, if you remember Second Life, it's this virtual world where they have residents, and these residents were super active. They would, among themselves form these little groups per language, and you can tell they're a little unhappy that their viewer is just in English. So they were finding ways to help each other with translation. It was a very, very disparate and non-connected environment. So what we realized is, oh my God, what a great way to do community localization. So we started doing, we started just engaging these people, and they were just more than happy to reach out to somebody, that they can get their, wonderful virtual world in all these languages. So I remember doing this first step just to make sure that, we are on the right track. We posted, I want to say, like 30 knowledge base articles up for German translation. And I thought, well, it'll be probably about a month. We'll see what happens. In 3 days, 3 days, we had it translated, edited, posted, and QA'd and in there. We realized that the German community alone was like 100 people. And then we realized there's, 20-something other languages with that big, community base, if not much larger. So we had, we had helpers to do internationalization, engineering, to do localization, translation, obviously, editing, as well as testing. And then, we would organize them to do onboarding of new users, and they would write original content. They would be writing blogs and creating little videos for, YouTube videos to help users, figure out what to do and where to go. It was really remarkable. I mean, and this is all this stuff that I mentioned was all done in like 6 months for 20 languages. It was really amazing. So for me, that was just an eye-opener, and like, well, there's other things you can be doing to get your game to international users, and it's a lot of fun.
I won't name the game, but I worked on a project that was very text-heavy, where all of the text strings were stored inside C++ files, giving you the ability not just to edit very close to the original code, but also break the game. And doing this across 5 languages, yeah, never again.
I'll try for something a little bit lighter. When I was working at Nintendo, I had a chance to take on a third-party IP called Professor Layton. It was a series of DS games. They were really cool because they basically, the meat of the gameplay was wordplay, word puzzles, brain teasers, things like that are pretty universally relatable content. But it was a real challenge for a couple reasons. The first was because all of it was wordplay and heavily relied on sort of the Japanese language for the meat of the game entertainment. Recasting all of these puzzles in a second language was a challenge, but it was also just a fun mental exercise. Also, the game was leveraged in Japan to be successful by the fact that they were leaning on the person who originally authored these puzzles was fairly famous in Japan. They used a huge celebrity campaign to roll it out. They were posting all over the place in Japan. They had a tremendous Japanese marketing budget. But we couldn't leverage some of those same things in America, so it was much more about how we could recast the game and what sort of things we could do to make it appealing for a Western audience. We found basically consumers who I had no idea were going to play the game and turned out to be advocates for us. For example, it works really well as something for mothers and fathers to play with their children as sort of like, I don't know, instead of a board game or reading a bedtime story, we found that a lot of people would actually play this game with their kids before they went to bed. So we realized that in doing the second and third iterations of the game and series, that there were different ways and different audiences that we could play to, and sort of recasting the identity of the game to be able to make that, to sort of leverage those people and what they were looking for in the game was really exciting.
Forza 4. That series has been growing on the localization side tremendously over the years. And Forza 4 got a perfect rating on Famitsu magazine, which is a big milestone. To localize in that the Japanese language and get that rating, that was a big deal. So proud.
Well, awesome. So we've got just a couple minutes left. So do we have any questions at all? Yes.
For the smartphone market, I know like with localization, it seems like it's best to also partner with a distributor of some sort, being whether it's Gree or Mobbage or any of these guys. Just like PopCap did with Jewel Legends, they made like a Japanese localized version. It's doing very well. And I know you guys mentioned like Indonesia and countries like that. So what would your recommendations be in terms of discerning what companies would actually be viable as opposed to those that like pose to be a major distributor or whatever for that country, and they're not really doing much of anything?
Okay, I have to repeat the question. So the question is basically for the smartphone market, how do you identify good, reliable, viable localization vendors in local markets?
Exactly.
And distributors, right?
And
Distributors.
and
Distributors.
Right. You know, there's, we run into this question a lot, actually, and we do both localization and distribution, but we are really focused on localization. And I think there's a lot of players out there that will promise you, quick success in an international market, and then, you hear feedback from your German audiences going, I have no idea what this text says. So that's actually really common. So anyway, for your mobile market, if you just localize it well into and probably the safest languages, for example, for iOS would be German and French, and then for Android you could add Korean and Japanese to that, and those are your tier 1 sure success markets. And and you can really use very similar distribution techniques you do for your for English. You don't have to go to a different distributor. Those are all that's a myth, honestly. And you can really get good results on these stores if your description is well made. If sometimes for Asian languages on both iOS and Android, you may want to actually localize the title for searchability if you do your keywords right. And then localization of a mobile game is actually pretty simple. I mean, there's like 10 to 15,000 words. That's if I say that to Zach, he will laugh. That's like one tiny low cycle for him, because when they do those big games, it's millions and millions of language pairs. So this is it's easy to do, and you can get it done really cheap, inexpensively with a good vendor, as opposed to paying somebody some crazy amounts in rev share for distribution that actually fails you.
Yeah, and you should be asking for, what games, if you're specifically talking about games, what games have they been involved in, and look at those games and see if you can get any feedback.
And see what that distribution really is. If they're promising the distribution, like, what kind of numbers have your clients?
Get their credentials.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to take one more question real quick.
particularly for small independent developers, does it ever make sense, or is it too risky to go with some sort of a crowdsourced localization, like a language translator or something like that?
Okay, so for smaller independent developers, is it ever safe to go with crowdsourcing for localization?
Sometimes it's more trouble than it's worth, to be honest. And it's also, it really depends on the platform. Mobile is really hard to do, through communities. Online games that are super popular are good. So it's good if your game is already live. Social and mobile could be a good material for community localization. But something smaller that's not known to people, they're just not, they don't want to do it. You have to be attractive to these people to actually jump in and do localization of your game.
And you're going to need to build the infrastructure to make that possible for them. So that, I mean, you got to think about the costs that are there versus focusing on a couple of key language pairs that will help you the most and plunking down for those instead. So it's definitely content dependent.
Again, the software at localization versus game localization is completely different. So stay away from vendors that are like, oh, we do UIs for applications. You want a game experience localization group.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks to the panel.